Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 4, Episode 46. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Kamala Harris's campaign raises $1 billion in roughly 4 months in an effort to elect her president of the United States of America, and at the end of the day, she gets blown out and she's down $20 million. Let's discuss. And the NFL. The Arizona Cardinals are good at football. Or the NFL just sucks. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting.
Act 1. Presidential campaigns are one big grift.
I didn't expect I would do another piece on politics this week, but it is just unavoidable given the numbers that are coming out now about how much money the Democrats raised in a very short period of time. Kamala Harris raising $1 billion, billion with a B, $1 billion in roughly 4 months. And at the conclusion of her campaign, in a loss no less, she's in the negative, roughly $20 million. The people in her campaign are spending money like drunken sailors on shore leave in a Filipino whorehouse. Harken back not 4 years ago when Donald Trump claimed that the election was stolen and he's going to raise money in order to fight the good fight. And he raises over $250 million. And what I recall was 1 week. I think he raised a total of $500 million, but like in 1 week, he raised $250 million. And what did you hear from the left? What did you hear from the liberal punditry? It was how badly that money was misappropriated in service of what was, in their minds, a bullshit cause. You had different independent groups raising money to complete the border wall with Mexico. Steve Bannon rightfully was convicted and went to jail, not for actually defrauding these investors, but he was under subpoena to testify, and he said, screw you, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to testify with regard to my involvement or anyone else's involvement in what was a complete and total grift. The Democrats' predicament, raising all of that money just to spend it all, is illustrative of the fact that there really is no difference between the left and the right, the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's all one big grift. It's not whether or not you're getting grifted, dear listener. It's what you buy into in order to give your money away. What's your grift? What sales pitch works on you? Just like in the Republican ecosystem, just like in the Republican infrastructure, there are all of these institutional groups that are going to get this money. There are these key lobbyists. You have your pollsters, you have your data crunchers, your public relations people, your policy team. That the money is spent on these things sounds legitimate. It sounds like this is all in service for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or any other politician to run a campaign in order to win an election. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, dear listener, but it's all a grift. There is no infrastructure that requires that much money, $1 billion. And there certainly isn't an infrastructure that requires that amount of money for what amounted to a 4-month campaign. Here's one of the stories that I saw that inspired me to do this piece. I wasn't going to do anything about it. It may have been an aside in another segment. But Kamala Harris goes on this Call Her Daddy or Call Me Daddy podcast. Whatever the name is, I'm not even going to edit this out. I don't listen to it. It's not for me. I'm not going to say anything denigrating about it. But Kamala Harris is going on this podcast. I think it's the #1 female-oriented podcast online. So Kamala Harris is going to go to speak to women, and what kind of women? Younger women. She wants to identify with younger women and motivate women who may not already be registered to vote to go out and vote. This is exactly the same type of strategy that Donald Trump was running on young men. He's motivating young men who would otherwise not participate in politics by way of the things that he was doing and saying on his campaign. And where was he doing these things and saying these things? On podcasts, and podcasts that are generally listened to by younger men. Kamala Harris, not to be outdone, realizes this may be an opportunity, and she goes on the number one female podcast, and it's generally, I believe, in the age group of like 16 to 35 or something like that. It's younger women. Did I listen to the podcast? No, I didn't. Did I see clips of it? Yes, I did. Was it completely benign? Yes, it was. Nothing challenging in there, and you wouldn't expect as much. That's a friendly place for Kamala Harris to go to talk about issues that she believes are pertinent to younger women, namely abortion. It turns out that Kamala Harris going on to this podcast, and note that I keep using this particular term, podcast. A podcast is generally listened to on one's device, on one's phone, on one's computer. You can listen to it while working out. You can listen to it while driving or otherwise commuting. The thing about a podcast is you don't have to watch it visually to get the full effect. It's a conversation between two people. And generally, watching a podcast can be boring insofar as there aren't any visuals to stimulate you beyond two people just looking at one another and having a conversation. So a podcast is just as effective in the audio format as it is in the video format. Why would I go at such lengths to describe to you, dear listener, the nature of the podcast? Kamala Harris's team spent six figures, and I saw the quote, six figures, not with the number, but with the words. In other words, I believe if it were $100,000, you might have seen news break that they had spent $100,000. The fact that it was written as six figures leads me to believe that it was in excess of $100,000. Kamala Harris's campaign spent six figures creating a unique set for this girl who does the Call Me Daddy podcast to host Kamala Harris. I'll pull a random number out of the hat. Let's say it's $338,000. Kamala Harris's campaign spent $338,000 to create a unique set for her to be on a podcast with this girl who uses a distinctly different set in order to record every other episode of her podcast. I like to say on this podcast all the time that I'm trying not to speculate as much in my life. I don't know that it's productive for me or for you or for anyone. But in speculating as to why a unique set would be created to host this conversation between a presidential candidate and this podcaster, I have seen other clips of this girl and her podcast. And the podcast is generally more oriented towards sex and sexuality and a conversation about sex and sexuality between two women. And the thought process may have been, that's not a suitable environment to host a conversation with a presidential hopeful, that there may be too many people who would question Kamala Harris getting on the set of this girl's podcast, her normal set, which was sexualized or hypersexualized. Pure, unadulterated speculation. I don't know that that's the case, but it fits. It fits with how, the word that's coming through me is ludicrous. How ludicrous this all is. If Kamala Harris wants to reach out to this audience, and this audience is captured by this girl and the conversations that she has with other women, and those conversations are sexual in nature, the hypocrisy of her saying, yes, I want to capture your audience, but I'm not going to lower myself. I'm not going to come down to your level and sit in your podcast studio where the week before or the day before you were having a conversation with some porn star or some girl who's talking about her sexual exploits. I want what I can get from you. I really don't want you. So we'll go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a unique podcast set that you may never use again in order for me to communicate my message to your audience, those women who may not be potential voters. It is illustrative of the fact that you have a bunch of people in control of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that have no real tether to the day-to-day world that you and I live in. They literally live in a fantasy world. As much as we might say that about anyone in Hollywood or in any other place on planet Earth, these people in Washington, D.C. live in a fantasy world. What is the point of creating a unique set for a podcast, a medium that lends itself, if not is routinely engaged in via the audio format, and to spend that kind of money, 6 figures worth, to net you what? It doesn't appear that young women, at least by way of the data that I've seen so far, a week after the election, it doesn't appear that younger women came out in droves to vote for Kamala Harris any more than they did for Joe Biden. Let's stay on the podcast theme. Let's flip the script, so to speak, on the podcast theme. I don't know whether or not Kamala Harris's campaign paid to be on the Call Me Daddy podcast. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, because as it turns out, they very well controlled the content and the format and the pacing of that interview. Where they would not have been able to control it is Joe Rogan. And now we find out that Joe Rogan gave Kamala Harris's campaign an open invitation when she was in Texas to come and do his podcast. He has said it numerous times. I told her, you could show up at 2:30 in the morning. I will be here and we will do it. I will work around whatever your schedule is in Texas. Did Kamala Harris end up doing Joe Rogan's podcast? No, she didn't. What she did do is engage a number of celebrities to give her endorsements. You saw all those celebrity endorsements. I mean, she had movie stars, she had music moguls, she had media icons, the entire cast of the Avengers, Beyonce, Oprah Winfrey. News breaks that it's possible that the Kamala Harris campaign was paying for all these celebrity endorsements. Now, when I did the research on this, I wanted to find out who got paid what, and it turns out that was more a rumor that was started on Instagram than it was fact that was verified by any journalist. I think the question is still out to what extent Kamala Harris's campaign may have paid for some of these endorsements, because it looks like the money that was associated with the events that these celebrities appeared at, it looks like that money is filtered through a number of different types of organizations, and you don't know whether or not someone's getting paid an appearance fee or a performance fee, and you haven't, at least as of the recording of this podcast, heard a lot of these celebrities come out individually, not through their agent, not through their public relations team. They haven't individually come out and said, that's absolute and total bullshit. We didn't receive dime one for our endorsement of Kamala Harris. Be that as it may, when you raise $1 billion in 4 months to run a presidential election, and at the end of the day, you are in the hole $20 million, you leave yourself open to speculation that you were paying for your endorsements, that you were paying for practically anything and everything, and that the entire thing's a grift. Does some of this disingenuous bullshit actually permeate into the psyche of the public at large, and we collectively realize that one party may have ideas that we support, but we don't trust them at all, and we think that they're totally full of shit, and another party may have ideas that we find more reprehensible, but we believe that they believe what they're saying. It isn't going to be the money in the 21st century. The capital, the currency that's going to get you the biggest return is authenticity. My buddy Brian says it all the time. You can't buy a team to win a championship in reference to sports, and you can't buy an election by buying celebrity endorsements, by feeding the Washington, D.C. grift machine and blurting out a few sentence fragments about joy and unity. Longtime listeners of the podcast will have heard me said over and over again, and I'll say it again here. I am a markets guy. I believe in markets. Markets allow for businesses, they allow for industries, they allow for communities to address problems in a more efficient and prompt manner than you would have if it were a centrally controlled or a state-controlled environment. The problem with markets, however, is they also allow for people to come in and attempt to make money off of situations or off of different circumstances or off of different, somewhat efficient markets, thereby making them less efficient. This is true of Wall Street. It's true of finance. It is true of how companies operate in order to increase the price of their stock. Basically, it doesn't matter whether or not you are a washing machine manufacturer or you are an airline. For all intents and purposes, you are a financial services company. Everything is working in service of your stock price. Well, now this is true of our election system. This is not a system whereby you need to raise money in order to influence the voters. It goes into a structured, cohesive, bureaucratic grift machine. Thankfully, although markets can be the problem, markets are also the solution. How long are people going to continue to donate money? How long are candidates going to be able to raise $1 billion and get such a poor return? And that's going to be the new standard or the new norm. That candidate, that party, these people, they're not going to continue to participate in a system that works this inefficiently and garners such poor results. Time will tell. But we may be seeing the evolution of how elections operate insofar as where is money spent and how, and will the return that you receive on the money that you spend have a greater impact on how you're perceived by voters than the influence campaign that you're paying for.
Act 2, are the Arizona Cardinals good, or does the NFL suck?
The NFL on Sundays is not appointment TV. There's rarely a game that I'm going to take time out of my day to sit down and watch in its entirety. But many of the games I will have on in the background, and if I'm out and about, if I'm gallivanting, there are football games displayed on the television sets of many a bar and restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona. I have been out and about gallivanting the past 3 weekends when the Arizona Cardinals were playing football. They played the Miami Dolphins, they then played the Chicago Bears, and they played the New York Jets. Arizona won all 3 games, and as of today, the recording of this podcast, they have won 4 straight contests. The Arizona Cardinals are an above average football team. They are above 500. In passing, I have watched other National Football League contests. I have watched the San Francisco 49ers play. I've watched the Dallas Cowboys play. I watched the Detroit Lions play the Houston Texans in Texas. And I unfortunately caught about 20 minutes of the LA Rams Miami Dolphins game, which was the Monday night game, Monday, November the 11th. In doing this piece, I had a quandary of whether or not to call it the Arizona Cardinals are good at football or the NFL sucks. So, why make a decision? Why not have both sides equally represented in this piece? The Arizona Cardinals were not consistent at the beginning of the season. They didn't run the ball as effectively as they needed to, but the bigger issue was Kyler Murray was not as consistent as he needed to be. Kyler Murray is a great football player, but he's always an X factor because he's a smaller quarterback and he has these games where he just seems to struggle to read the coverage in the field, namely because he's too small to see over his own linemen. In this iteration of the Arizona Cardinals offense, first and foremost, they're running the ball extremely well. James Conner is killing it, but he's not the only one. Everyone that they put in the backfield now seems like they can carry the ball for 6 or 7 yards on any play that they run, including Kyler Murray, which leads me to the second point, which is Kyler Murray is most effective as a quarterback when he is as much a running threat as he is a throwing threat. And in this 4-game win streak, Kyler Murray has selectively run the football and done so in a very safe way.
he hasn't pulled many of the same stunts that he was pulling under Cliff Kingsbury, where he was running when he was under pressure in the pass game, or when he was running to score a touchdown starting from his own 43-yard line. Yes, he had those spectacular runs where he would run half the length of the field. And yes, he had those situations where he wasn't going to outrun the defense and he didn't slide in a timely manner and he got cracked. Win the battle, lose the war. He's not doing that anymore. Or at least he hasn't been doing that during this 4-game win streak. He's controlling the tempo of the game, not only with the passing game, but through the running game. The Arizona Cardinals offense is extremely well balanced. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a badass, a legitimate all-star in the making. And to no one's surprise, and it shouldn't be to your surprise, dear listener, if you watch football, a team that can maintain 7, 8, 9-minute drives and come away with points consistently has a much better defense on the other side. Teams are looking up at the scoreboard in the second and third quarter and noticing they're down 14, 18, 21, 24 points, and they need to start to move the ball in quickly, and that's allowing Arizona's defense to key more on passing plays than on running plays, and they are effectively getting off the field in 3 or 5 or 7 plays. I'm going to give a lot of credit to Jonathan Gannon, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Again, this is a 4-game winning streak. This is not some culmination of years worth of coaching experience that he's had with this team. But if you watch the Arizona Cardinals from the beginning of the season and seen their growth and development to what they are today, you can't say that they're not one of the top 5 NFL teams right now. Gannon's experience is on the defensive side of the ball, and like I said, their defense is playing much better, but I believe that that is being keyed by a very balanced and effective offense. It's easier to play defense when you're up 14 points or 21 points in the third quarter, and particularly where your offense has been on the field most of the time, and the offense that you're opposing is somewhat stale and stagnant because they haven't had any time to develop any rhythm. Contrast this, dear listener, with some of the other teams that I've mentioned in this very segment. I watched the Arizona Cardinals play the Miami Dolphins, and as much hype as the Miami Dolphins have had over the course of the last 3 seasons, they look fucking terrible. Tua looks completely inconsistent, and I hate those memes showing his brains being scrambled because, unfortunately, his brains have been scrambled, but he doesn't look good. He does not look consistent whatsoever. And I don't want to attribute that to the fact that he did have his brain scrambled, but he had these types of problems early on in his NFL career, and I don't think having 3 major concussions contributes to one getting wiser or sharper in their older age. I sat there and watched this pathetic demonstration of football between the Rams and the Dolphins on Monday night, and it was difficult to stomach. I saw each team turn the ball over in turn. So in roughly 9 or 10 plays, each team turned the ball over. It was pathetic. And this is a Rams team that was 4-4 at home versus a Dolphins team that was beat up, that was inconsistent, and they couldn't do anything. The scuttlebutt after the game was that the Miami Dolphins defense is so legit, and I'm thinking to myself, the Rams suck. The Chicago Bears played the Arizona Cardinals, and I was in awe of how bad the offensive play calling was. They were basically putting their rookie quarterback, repeat that line in your head, their rookie quarterback, first year he's played in the NFL, in 7 and 9 step drops against an Arizona Cardinals team whose defense is now keying off on a number of different teams because they're up, scoring a lot of points. You know the other team's going to have to throw to catch up. And they're putting this kid in these terrible positions. They're not giving him any opportunity to get into a rhythm. And he's getting killed up and into the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game. Caleb Williams, in a blowout game, is still taking 7 or 9 step drops for the Chicago Bears and still getting pounded. That's what she said. The Detroit Lions go on the road to the Houston Texans and have 5 turnovers. 5 turnovers in 2.5 quarters. Jared Goff, on a number of the series that I watched, took a football and threw it directly into the ground with a wide open wide receiver in front of him. He just threw the ball right into the ground. If he wasn't throwing it to the Houston Texans, he was throwing the ball directly into the ground. The Texans scored 23 points in a game where they had 5 turnovers. The Detroit Lions, wisely realizing that it wasn't Goff's night, ran the ball down their throats, ran the ball all over the Houston Texans, and end up kicking 2 long field goals to win that game 24-23. Everyone talks about how consistent Brock Purdy is. He misses many reads and many throws, and the San Francisco 49ers are a far cry from what they were, that offensive juggernaut that they were last year, and their defense isn't that good. The Bengals are at the Ravens, and you can't help but think that the Bengals are just bad this season because of Joe Burrow's frosted tips, but it's because of Joe Burrow's frosted tips. He gets into a situation where it's 3rd and 2, and I believe they're on like the 25-yard line of the Ravens, and they're down by 7. He throws a ball into the end zone on 3rd and 2, and it's incomplete, and the offense doesn't move, and everybody in the stadium knows, hey, he went for it on a 3rd and 2 because they've got a 4th and 2 play that they're going to run. They're not going to kick a field goal. They're going to go for it. They run their 4th and 2 play. Joe Burrow throws another ball into the end zone. He doesn't try to get the first down. He tries to get the touchdown. Incomplete. Washington versus Philadelphia. Washington is driving the ball. They're down 2. Philadelphia has just scored a touchdown. It's the 4th quarter. Washington has played very well throughout the course of the game. It's a close game. Again, down 2. Just been scored on by the Philadelphia Eagles. They're driving the ball. They get into a 3rd down situation. I believe it's like 3rd and 2, and they're on the 35-yard line. I don't even think it was the 35. I think it was like the 30 or maybe even the 29. And they don't get the first down, and they elect to go for it, 4th and 1 or a 4th and 2, instead of kicking what was, I believe the number I heard was a 43-yard field goal. They're down 2. It's the 4th quarter. They just got scored on. And instead of kicking a 43-yard field goal to go up 1, they elect to go for it. They don't get it, and they end up losing the game. The Kansas City Chiefs are undefeated, and they look like one of the worst undefeated football teams in the history of the National Football League, pulling out these wins against teams. They're the 21st century New England Patriots. And yes, the New England Patriots were the New England Patriots in the 21st century. So maybe I should say they're the 2020s New England Patriots. They don't win the game. They just don't make as many mistakes as the other team. They essentially allow the other team to beat themselves. And there's the point that I want to make. It's illustrated in the record of the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe it was Rondé Barber. I heard an interview with Rondé Barber back in the day. He played at Virginia. He was a All-Pro for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a Hall of Famer. He was giving an interview in his rookie season, or maybe it was his second season. What's the difference between college and the NFL? And his answer was so simple, but so brilliant. Everyone in the NFL is fast. Everyone in the NFL is athletic. Everyone in the NFL can do supernatural things. The difference between college and the NFL is, in the NFL, you have to think the game better than your opponent. In college, you could just be faster, you could be more athletic, you could have a higher skill set, and that carried the day. It won't do that in the NFL. You have to think the game better than your opponent. And that's where we find ourselves today, dear listener, in an NFL where you have players and coaches that just don't think the game very well. I have high hopes for the Arizona Cardinals in the 2024 NFL season, not because I think that they're an up-and-coming team, that they're a great team, as much as all these other teams suck. They're not well coached. They don't execute the stuff that they want to do very well. Their coaches, in particular, but even their players, make bad in-game decisions. It's not a very high-quality product. Are the Arizona Cardinals this year's Detroit Lions? I think they are. But I think that they have an easier path to become that type of team because they're able to climb on the backs of all of these other shitty teams. In sum, the Arizona Cardinals are a good football team because the NFL sucks. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.